Okay, folks, we'll, it's 2:02.
Sorry.
So we will, who are we missing? I think Grego's an apology. I think he's the only apology that I've had. So, and
We're like creatures with it, aren't we?
I know.
Just it over there and follow the seat.
Afternoon, everybody. Welcome, Tom. Lovely to see you here. So we've got our local Waters Done Well update with Andrew, and I will just pass across for you to kick us off. Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Mary Wise. Look, we had 2 hours booked for this. I don't think we're going to take all of that time. Some of the supporting information we're hoping to be able to present today is not quite available, but still wanted to take the opportunity to bring you up to speed with where things are at. Local Water Done Well, more from a policy direction and legislation, more so than anything that we're doing in terms of our response and work towards it. So yeah, Andrew Lebiota. Dirk's over in the corner if there's anything financial coming up, but I don't think there should be. So quick outline, really what we're looking to do is revisit the original timeline that we've discussed around Local Water Done Well and response to it. Talk about some potential delays of some of the key milestones that we're looking to achieve. Just refresh you on the Preliminary Arrangements Act that was passed into legislation in September. And then really introduce you to Bill 3, which was introduced into Parliament in December of 2024. It's a very comprehensive bill. I'll admit I've struggled trying to summarize it into a few slides. So I'm really just going to focus on some of the key issues around it because it is really an enduring piece of legislation that outlines the operational functions of water service providers. Talk to you about the updated announcements from LGFA. There's been some implications of those announcements on our financial modeling, which has created some of the delay. So I thought it'd be really good to give you some context around that, what it actually means and why it is impacting the financial modeling that we've been doing. And then just briefly touching on the levies. We have submitted on the levies. There's been not much progress with them, but just to refresh you of what they are, who's implementing them, and the effect that it will have on council. So the original timeline of January of this year, we were going to be doing the further modeling and further business case development. From there, early in February, we were going to have this workshop, followed by a workshop on the 20th of February to actually go through the business case. Because of that LGFA announcement and the modeling not being available, that 20th of February workshop is just a bit of a question mark at this point. I don't believe the business case will be complete by then. We are hoping to have the updated modeling scenarios to present to that, but we should have that clarity in the next day or two. Originally, we had, yes.
Excuse me, is this on the hub?
I'm going to provide that to you as well. Actually, I'm trying to collate it right now with Bill 3 when we get there. DIA has released a number of fact sheets that are very beneficial. So I want to try to get all of that information into one package and then it'll be made available to yourselves. Again, community consultation was originally planned for April and May. That was really to align with the annual plan consultation and just streamline things as much as possible. With the approval of the recommended option coming in a council meeting in June, allowing us to finalize the water service delivery plan over July and August, coming to you in August to approve the water service delivery plan for submission in September. So following on from that, this is just more of a very high level DIA timeline, which is very tiny. Again, this will become made available in a PDF format. But essentially what it looks at doing is you've got in your light blue kind of the decision-making process of what we're doing right now, going through the different options, the financial scenarios, developing those water service delivery plans. The darker blue is more around then your implementation phase and what they think would take councils to either ring fence, set up for their internal in-house delivery, or potentially create a new entity jointly or individually from then in July 2026 to go live with some of those entities. And then purple is when some of the regulation is coming into effect. So and some of your new planning documentation. So water services strategies, the actual economic regulation, and then the need to be financially sustainable by 2028. That 2028 deadline is in a bit of question as well, and that will be touched on later with those LGFA announcements. So if you remember back in September, the Preliminary Arrangements Act was actually passed into legislation. Now this is the foundational settings of how water services were going to be managed in a financially sustainable manner. This is what required councils to develop their water service delivery plan. Now, as you remember with the water service delivery plan, you have to outline what your model would be, and that's either the in-house or the water organization model. You need to consult on community with that. There is a streamlined decision-making and consultation process. So the consultation under Bill 2, or the Preliminary Arrangements Act, allowed you to only identify your current in-house versus your preferred model, and you only had to consult on the two. And then as well, to remind you with that financial sustainability that revolved around those three metrics of your revenue sufficiency, your investment sufficiency, and your financing sufficiency. So after this act came into power, we engaged Becca to do that initial viability assessment, which looked at a snapshot of our current delivery model as it was and told us, would we meet those financial sustainability metrics? The answer there was no. And that prompted the further work that we've conducted internally through financial modeling and then externally with the Regional Recovery Agency and PwC to look at alternate delivery models that are available to Napier City Council. So we're still looking towards that September 3rd deadline for the water service delivery plan as legislated currently. I guess happy to pause and take any questions on that Preliminary Arrangements Act, or if everybody feels they're quite familiar with it and the need for the water service delivery plan. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Through you, Mayor Wise. Thank you. So just in summary, getting that straight in my head. So by that 3rd of September 2025 deadline, we have to submit our water service delivery plan, and that includes confirmation of our delivery model that meets the financial sustainability metrics.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. Has the PwC, or the converging, I guess, of the internal and the external work with PwC, what's the deadline for that?
The internal is pretty much there. We had to redo some of the capital forecasting just based on what the Three Waters team is projected for their capital delivery. The updated modeling from PwC, we were hoping to have complete by next week, which would indicate that financial sustainability metric. Again, that's where the moving feast of with the LGFA announcement, it does affect some of that financial sustainability. And when we start talking about the announcements, it brings into question that deadline of the 2028 that's meant to be outlined as well. LGFA realizing that not all councils would probably be able to meet that metric. So they're actually allowing for a longer grace period. So it really does alter the modeling projection quite significantly.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mayor Wise, because my question is, I guess once we have that external piece of work come in and we've done our internal modelling, there's obviously an analysis piece in there as well with some recommendations that probably requires some external expertise as well. Is that framework set?
The external expertise is not set. We had anticipated that was the February 20th workshop, was to actively workshop that with elected members. We did set some of that criteria assessment in one of the earlier workshops that we would assess the business case outcome, not quite the financial modeling. Because I guess that's one of the bigger issues as well, is through all this, the financial modeling is really just one piece of the puzzle. When we're looking at the business case, we have to take into a lot of non-financial benefit accounts as well. Improved delivery, better outcomes for community outside of just what the impact on rates is.
And so when's it planned for the business case to come?
I honestly cannot speak to that at this stage. It really will hinge on the completion of that modeling to then infer the outcomes of the business case and the recommendations there.
So that September 25 is going to come up pretty quickly, and you have an election in the middle there as well where you can't make
Yes.
significant decisions. I'm just trying to get a gauge on whether or not that'll come before council in that period.
Yeah, ideally, I think it would. The worst case at this stage is we wouldn't be able to align our consultation with the annual plan. And we may have to go and seek our own consultation timeframe outside of the annual plan consultation.
I think the reality is that every council in the country will be facing these same challenges. And I've spoken to Katie about it, saying you do realise that with the September deadline, in all likelihood, we're going to end up in a position where we're having to make significant decisions during that period that we're not meant to be. So I think we need to continue that conversation with central government so that they can actually understand what their timeframes mean for us within our environment and with it being an election year. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you.
I have a question also.
Maxine.
Yeah, Madam Mayor. Do we have, Andrew, or whoever, any idea of how much it's going to cost us, how much we have to borrow, how much we've put in the LTP for this? Does anybody know? We must have some ballpark figure somewhere.
So Councillor Bogue, so the figures we have are the ones that we've shared with you previously. So when we've done the modelling before, if you remember, we had those business cases and they gave you some indicative numbers. That's what we're checking at the moment. So we're confirming our ones for Napier City Council, and the RRA are working through with PwC at the moment for those regional ones. And that's what Andrew's talking to. When we've got all of that, that's when we can bring it back to do the workshop with you to actually share the various options and what the different models would mean.
So is there something in the LTP that's...
So no, it's not in the LTP. Do you remember we've done previous workshops last year when we had those handouts from the regional RRA? That the modelling on the back pages, it gave you some indicative numbers. I can't remember them off the top of my head,
okay.
but we can send them back out to you. They'll be on the hub.
Thank you.
The LTP was prepared on the basis that it was business as usual, essentially, because we didn't have enough information to be able to include it at that time. And then obviously, as we work towards our next LTP, then we would be in a much better position to be able to have those accurate costings going through.
Yeah, but that's what you'll see coming up over the next few months.
Okay, thank you.
Hayley.
Just a little clarification to see if I heard you correctly. Did you say that there was a change in what counted as internal versus external? So our internal option can be our in-house, but external can't be a CCO. It has to be a combined one? Is that? Did I hear
No, sorry. So be covering that in a few slides. Terminology has kind of changed with Bill 3 in the language. I'll have one slide up that just shows you quite clearly that what they're trying to do with the language now is you've got your water service provider, which is kind of your top level hierarchy, and then it goes into territorial authorities who deliver that. So your in-house, then the other option is a water organization. That water organization then is the structure of a single owned shareholding CCO, a joint council CCO, or the consumer trust or mixed consumer trust TA model. They've changed that, and I'll discuss it a bit more as well, because there's quite a difference between a CCO and how it's understood under the Local Government Act versus what a CCO would be under Bill 3. So that's why they're now calling it a water organization, because there are some stark differences between, I guess, the shareholder influence that council has through owning a water organization as a shareholder versus the CCO under Local Government Act. I've got a slide kind of talking just to that shareholder influence as well. So without further ado, we'll talk a bit about Bill 3, so the Local Government Water Services Bill. And so this was introduced in December of 2024. It's currently with Finance and Expenditure Committee for consideration. Submissions closed the 23rd February 2025. Regional Recovery Agency is starting to put forth a regional submission, and internally we're starting to collaborate on what a Napier City Council submission may look like, and then weigh up if we submit individually or if we do it jointly in collaboration with the RRA. Again, it's quite comprehensive, so we're looking for subject matter experts within council to comment on their relevant areas. There's a lot of information around revenue generation, financial contributions, stormwater bylaws, trade waste bylaws. So it really touches kind of all points of council and a lot to consider. So again, the bill just really sets out the new arrangements for the water service delivery system, and that's where they start using that language of water organizations versus council-controlled organizations. It sets out the new economic regulation and consumer protection regime. So that's obviously through Te Mata Arawai for water quality and Commerce Commission for actual economic regulation and consumer protection. So really some of the high-level areas of the bill, and I won't talk to all of them. The ones that I will really focus on today are the planning and accountability framework, because that's where, as a council being a shareholder, probably has the most influence over a water organization. They touch on the ministerial oversight. I won't go into that, but that does allow them to appoint the Crown Monitor or the Crown Water Services Specialist if they find that a water organization or water service provider is in breach of the bill. The economic regulation and consumer protection is discussed. And then I will touch on the provision of water services by regional councils, because there is some parts of the bill that, in our opinion, affect HBRC and the stormwater assets that they own that are within Napier City Council's boundaries. So this is just the chart that I was alluding to that really kind of shows that high level language of what is talked about in the bill. So you have your water service provider, always referred to as the WSP, and who can provide water services, either territorial authorities as an in-house business unit or a water organization. Now that water organization can be a single council owned, the multi-council owned, sole consumer trust, or the joint consumer trust council model. Now, a water organization, some little specifics, must be a company, and thus are covered by the Companies Act. I've had enough difficulty going through this bill. I'm not going to go into the Companies Act just yet to give you a complete description of what that means to them. But they must not engage in any activities other than providing water services, and they must have an independent competency-based board, which we discussed earlier. Now, they are allowing for exemptions to the Companies Act and to providing services other than water, but that's on a very stringent case-by-case basis that you need to get approval from the minister on. The bill also provides a water organization very similar powers to what a council currently has. That's essentially to charge customers for water services, the requirement of development contributions, and as well, it actually allows water organizations to propose bylaws back to territorial authorities or their shareholders. Now, this is just a brief slide that looks at the different governance structures. We've kind of touched on this before, but just wanted to really reiterate it, I suppose, in this context, whereas in a single or multi-council owned water organization, you have your councils, and then they would set and establish a board, then you'd have your executive level, and then you would actually have your organization falling under that. In the council and consumer trust model, you've got the consumers who would then elect their own consumer trust. Again, the council and that consumer trust would establish a board, all falls down from there. And then the full consumer trust model where you have the consumers electing their trust, who then appoints the board. Happy to take any questions on that or the previous slide around water service providers and that clarity between water organization and CCO if required.
I have a question. Who will oversee the water regulations to see the quality of water, those sorts of rules?
Yeah, so that's, so it's Taumata Ottawa currently. Under this bill, its name changes to the Water Services Authority, Taumata Ottawa. So they do your drinking water and wastewater standards, more of the environmental regulation. And then through the economic regulation, that's going to be sitting with Commerce Commission. And
It's not, none of those, it's not us.
No.
It's external.
yeah, exactly. And there's quite a bit in the bill that alludes to the powers given to both Taumata Ottawa and Commerce Commission for the regulatory backstops, if you will. And for Commerce Commissions, it's things like price quality regulation, simply just quality regulation. It's really going to be a big step change. But what it allows Commerce Commission to do is require a water service provider to set either a minimum revenue so that it can meet what's required for investment and renewals and depreciation, but also set that maximum revenue threshold that if they feel that you're overcharging your customers for water, they can cap that. So very much like what occurs currently in the electricity sector, the gas line sector, other highly regulated markets within New Zealand.
Thank you.
Haley?
Yeah, just my understanding is that we've ruled out the consumer trust ones. And at the last time we were talking about this, I asked for like a pros and cons, just so that decision, like, so we understand where that was come from.
Yep.
Do we have a timeline on when that's coming back to us?
I could try to we'll have a discussion. I wonder if, I feel like that was going to be included in the business case because it's something
Okay.
that was requested not only by our council, but the others as well. So I'll loop back to see if that is section in the, if not, we can probably get that touched upon, or if required, we can write our own, almost like an MCA, I suppose, of why consumer trust models were not included in any of the modeling scenarios.
That'd be good, thanks.
Sorry, I'm just writing it. So this is some of the planning, reporting, and financial management subjects that are covered under the bill. So one of your key documents is your statement of expectations, and that's the statement of expectations from the shareholders of a water organization to, the shareholders to the actual board of the water organization. From there, you develop your water services strategy. Now, the water services strategy is drafted by the water organization, but it can actually be amended by the shareholders. And the water services strategy essentially replaces what the LTP is within a water setting. So it's supposed to cover your first 3 financial years, and then in detail, and then 10 years in a more relative term. From there, you do your water services annual budget, and that's similar to your annual plan. So that's only done in the years that don't include the first financial year of the water services strategy. Again, the budget is set by the organization, but it can be amended by the shareholders, similar to the water services strategy. Then finally, you have your water services annual report. And that's just really all about performance assessment coming back to the board, or coming back to the shareholders to say, here's what we said we were going to do. This report says we did this, or we did not do this. Those reports will be publicly available, and those reports will also be scrutinized by the economic regulator. So with this statement of expectations, and this is why they're using that word water organization as opposed to CCOs, because it gives the shareholder a lot more, I don't want to say power, but influence over the water organization. So because the water organization must give effect to the statement of expectation, and what can be included in the statement of expectation are things such as the strategic direction, the priorities, the expectations of the water organization, actually gives the shareholder quite a bit of influence. Beyond that, so I'm just going through my notes. I'm going to go to the next slide because I have it a bit more clear here, is that within the bill, and some submissions are starting to form on this, is that water organizations are already going to be operating in a very heavily regulated environment, trying to meet very stringent statutory objectives. So they're foreseeing this real potential for a double up between shareholders issuing the statement of expectation, saying the exact same thing that the regulator is going to do. So they're kind of questioning what's the point of allowing a strategic direction being given versus in a statement of expectation when it's already covered in regulation. As well, when it comes down then into your annual budget, the fact that that can be amended by the shareholder gives the shareholder even greater power and influence over what will be done by the water organization. And it doesn't allow that water organization to actually have the autonomy of setting its budget, meeting its targets, if that budget is going to be amended and only approved by the shareholder. Then another issue with that statement of expectation that has been raised is just getting agreement among shareholders in a multi-council water organization. And I think that one's just a bit easier to overcome through good discussion and negotiation with your partners as you go into a joint water organization. But again, I think local government New Zealand, Taito Aroa, are really challenging on the influence of the shareholder on the annual budget process and that water services strategy process. Whereas if you look at what they're comparing it to as CCOs under the Local Government Act, basically the CCO board provides a draft budget to the shareholder, but the shareholder only provides a bit of comment on it. You know, they don't actually have the power to amend it and say, no, you will actually do this. So it just really brings in some question of, I guess, the intent of Bill 2 or the Preliminary Arrangements Act, and what the policy really set out to do with was looking for that balance sheet separation and minimizing, I guess, the political impact on a water organization. But now in Bill 3, they're actually really enforcing that ability for political influence to make its way back into the delivery of water services. So now just briefly on the implications of regional councils. So this is from the interpretation of NCC officers and the RA as well in their interpretation of Bill 3, is if you look at how water services are defined, especially stormwater services, HBRC could, and I believe would be deemed as a water service provider. We've met with HBRC's team, and they're currently seeking some independent advice on this as well. Because what that does mean is that HBRC would be under the same requirement as all other territorial authorities being affected by local water done well. You know, they'd have to look to ring fence, they would look to develop a water service delivery plan, community consultation, look at different delivery options. And the one thing that we just noted as a highlight is that HBRC could become a shareholder in a water organization established by a territorial authority. So it actually gives them the opportunity to have a seat at the table in a regional entity if that was the direction that was chosen. So these are just some really entry-level discussions we've had with them. We had our first, I think, meeting with them last week only to bring them up to speed on this. So we haven't touched base with them then. But in this world of kind of imperfect information around this bill coming to light, the LGFA announcements, now all of a sudden HBRC kind of enters the picture in a blurry way. You can see how decision-making just becomes even more challenging, requiring time that we don't have to really make a sound decision. Any questions on the HBRC or that shareholding influence?
Just a question, would they have to consult if they were included in that manner?
They would. Yep.
Yeah.
All right, so the LGFA announcements, which is what we've kind of talked to quite a bit. Now, originally, when we did some baseline modeling and workshop previously, all the discussion was around a 500% debt to revenue threshold that was going to be granted to water organizations that were established by councils. December 20th announcements come, and that threshold is not considered anymore. So it's actually been removed as a constraint. What the big focus is on now is what is called your FFO to debt ratio, and the percentage of FFO to debt that you must maintain as a covenant with LGFA. So previously, everyone just kind of used a blanket 10% FFO to debt because that aligns pretty closely with what's expected from the likes of S&P and other global rating agencies. What LGFA have come out and said is that it actually depends on the scale of your water organization and basically the number of connections you have. So if you are a large scale operation with a lot of connections, they may only require an 8% FFO to debt covenant. If you're a small supplier, small organization with limited number of connections, they might require a much higher FFO to debt ratio of, say, 12%. So that's the band they've given us, 8% to 12%. Now, it doesn't seem big in, or percentage-wise, but if you look at it over, the life of an asset in 3 waters, that could mean $200 per connection a year. So if you extrapolate that out, it's actually quite significant to each individual, and then collectively on your rate base, it's quite substantial. So that's actually one of the big things that has changed. And how do we model that? We haven't gotten the guidance yet from LGFA of where they would class, say, excuse me, a Napier-only organization versus a joint-only organization. We're trying to tee up some meetings with LGFA to get that certainty so we can actually model it accurately. Because if we went regionally and we were only required to, say, maintain that 8% ratio versus if we went solely and we had to model that 12%, well, we'd at least have clarity of what's expected from us in terms of generating revenue. The other big one as well that has come into light was that period of 5 years for the application of the financial covenants. So this, again, goes counter to that 2028 financial sustainability metric that was included in the Preliminary Arrangements Act. So what LGFA is saying is like some councils will find it very difficult to hit that 8, 10, or 12% covenant very early on in their life as an organization. So they're actually going to allow for 5 years for you to meet that covenant. And so what that does is it allows for you to have a much smaller step change in any increases in rates required to meet that covenant. Whereas if you're to take that 2028 requirement under the Preliminary Arrangements Act as we must hit that, you could have seen quite a spike and jump in your rates from 2027 to 2028. LGFA is being a bit more pragmatic, I say, being that, okay, will allow you to have maybe 6%, 7%, then up to 9% over that longer period. So it's less burdensome on the ratepayer in the short term. So those are really the,
Sorry, Andrew, a question for Julie.
Thank you, Andrew. Just a question about funds from operation. Does that mean rates or anything else?
Funds from operations is generally just rate. It doesn't include any capital revenue, so it would not include financial contributions. And essentially, it really looks at what would be your cash flow, would you say, Dirk?
But the way that I think about it is the funds available to pay down debt in a stress scenario. So you keep the business going and more of the funds that's available. So it's before capital, but after interest payments. And yeah, it's basically that's the basic
Sorry, that was the wrong thing. So obviously, as you can see with that difference of that debt required or that covenant, that 8% versus 12%, we really want to get that clarity so that we can model accordingly. And that's been what the delay has been at that regional level. to allow for that financial modeling to be complete, to inform the business case for that to actually be complete as well. So just quickly talk about the levies. So 2 levies that are being proposed, the one through the Water Services Authority, Te Mata Ottawa, and the other through the Commerce Commission. So the proposed levy for 2025, so sorry, to back up, both of these are being apportioned by population. So yeah, just looking at New Zealand's population, the total cost, and then attributing that to each council based on population numbers. So the proposed levy for 2025 for the Water Services Authority was 267,000, and for Commerce Commission was a little over 84,000. So these levies are currently not budgeted for. So this could be just an additional cost to council as they're not tacked on to anything at the moment. We have submitted on the levies, again, through the Regional Recovery Agency, kind of had 3 main themes that we submitted on in support with our neighbors. One is the proportion and transparency around the Crown component. So I think currently the Crown is funding 12% under their proposed makeup. And we kind of challenged that. There was a term within the documentation that if they followed the full strict application of the guidelines, they should be paying more like 18% based on what they deemed as the common good. So we kind of submitted, if you want to follow the guidelines and it says 18%, why wouldn't you come to the 18%? And then as well, the other one is the apportionment. So this isn't too strict against Napier because we are quite a urban environment. I think 92% of our population is connected to the water network. So when we look at by population for us, it doesn't impact it that greatly. But to support our regional neighbors, where somewhere like CHB, I think they've only got about 50% of their population is connected, and the others are small private suppliers. It's kind of like, well, why are we going to be charging to the small private supplier for something that's not going to be regulated? So we did challenge on the apportionment. What has been proposed is either maybe looking at a levy based on your total water take, so it's on a usage base, or on the Hine Korako register, which is what we report through to Te Mata Ottawa based on our actual connected users. So that way it would only be connected users that are actually charged for the levy as opposed to based on that population metric. And then as well, just not a big one with the timing and phasing of implementing these changes. What we wanted them to do is whenever they were going to be reviewing the levies was that it was in alignment with either the council LTP cycles or proposed water organization water service strategy cycles, so that it could be properly accounted for. As it currently stood, I think the first review was going to occur in the year prior to the LTP cycle. So it just was like a bit of a misalignment where we felt if they were going to review the levy, they had the idea of what that new cost could be. You could bring that into your LTP or your water services strategy. And then where next? So internally, we're currently starting to draft our own water service delivery plan. Given the timelines and the constraints, we are taking a safe bet approach in that we will have our own water service delivery plan drafted, ready for approval if required. But regionally, we are updating that modeling based on that LGFA announcements that I discussed. That will then allow for the business case to be completed. However, preempting that as well, we are starting now to work collaboratively on a joint water service delivery plan that if the regional body or regional entity is the choice preferred option, that we have that water service delivery plan drafted and ready to submit for approval as well. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Andrew? I think really good, clear information, Andrew. Thank you.
One little clarification.
Yep, Hayley.
Those levies, did you say whether they were to be paid by shareholders or the organisation themselves?
By the water service provider.
Right.
So that would then
Okay.
either be the water organization if it was stood up, or the local authority if they're retaining it as in-house. So paid by them with the expectation that it is passed on to the consumer. And generally, if you look at, similar to your power bill, it's a line item usually that it's stated for the levy as well. Bit of discrepancy as well of how to exactly charge for it. Some of those levies, economic regulation, for instance, is only 50-50 between storm or water supply and wastewater. It doesn't account for stormwater at this moment, whereas the Water Services Authority, I think it's like 40% is meant to be attributed to water supply, 40% to wastewater, and then 20% to stormwater. So you kind of, how detailed you go into a rates line item, or is it just one and then internally it gets divvied out? I'm not too sure.
Any further questions? Hayley?
There was talk at some stage around stormwater not being included. Is stormwater still in? Still 3 waters?
In all of our scenario planning and modeling, we've always included stormwater. I think the main driver there is if you look at, especially from Napier's point of view, we've got a very capital intensive stormwater network that just our low-lying nature rely on a lot of pump stations and large infrastructure to mitigate any natural disasters. To really adequately fund it, it needs to sit within the 3 waters envelope. If it was to go 2 waters and stormwater was left with council to ring fence that activity and to meet those financial sustainability metrics would be quite challenging. Some early guidance that we have had from DIA was that if you had the 3 waters in an entity, not every activity has to be sustainable on its own. It could be that if you needed to cross-subsidize your stormwater activity for a year through water charges, because you had some massive investment that needed to be done, that would be acceptable. Whereas if it, stayed within council, there would be the anticipation there, though, that you would ring fence that. It would have to meet the financial sustainability metrics under the Preliminary Arrangements Act.
Okay, excellent. Great update. Thank you very much, Andrew. And
No,
we
thank
will
you.
wait for further information with regards to that analysis and modelling work that's underway.
Perfect. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.